Morning, everybody. It is Monday. You are very welcome to join us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky. Big breaking news for you that will impact almost all of us. We're hearing that Liz Truss is preparing to scrap plans to remove the 45p top rate of income tax for the highest earners. Downing Street has faced a bitter backlash against the plans, led by the former Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, who said that the Prime Minister had no mandate for the change. Grant Shapps, who we'll speak to shortly, the ex-Transport Secretary, agreeing with him, saying handing big giveaways to people who need them least is no way forward. Joining us now is our political editor, Beth Rigby. Hi, Beth, you're up at conference, Tory party conference in Birmingham. Tell us more.
Morning, Kay. A huge story is emerging this morning, which has huge implications for the government and, as you said, the country. Having insisted yesterday that she would stand firm, the Prime Minister and her Chancellor are expected to decide to announce that they are not proceeding with that decision to abolish the top rate of tax. That's the 45 pence tax rate. It affects 1% of earners, those earning £150,000 a year. They were going to scrap it from April 2023 next year. And as I understand it, they will now not proceed with that policy. It's a massive U-turn. Even yesterday, as I said, the Prime Minister said we have to stay the course. But the rebellion, not just from backbenchers, but I think also from within government, has obviously proved too great.
OK, why have they done this? In a great scheme of things, it's not a lot of money, but they weren't reading the room, were they?
That's exactly right, Kay. It wasn't a lot of money. It saved £2 billion in tax cuts, or cost £2 billion rather, and that was in a £45 billion package. But it was not consulted upon in Cabinet. Liz Truss told the BBC that yesterday, and Kwasi Kwarteng took the decision. One Cabinet Minister said to me it wasn't right that he hadn't told the Cabinet. He should have discussed it more widely, given that it was such a contentious policy. And the political toxicity, if you like, of cutting the top rate of tax for the richest people, or richest earners, should I say, in the country amid a cost of living crisis has prompted a huge rebellion. And we've seen it with Michael Gove yesterday, publicly coming out saying it should be opposed, and Grant Shapps, who I think you're going to be speaking to soon, Kay, saying in an article in the Times this morning that it was an unforced error, harming the government's economic credibility. Now, those calls are not just happening outside government, they're happening inside too. Liz Truss obviously wants to reset the dial. She wants to get rid of this story, this problem, this rebellion. It was going to dominate the party conference, and they are now, I think, preparing to announce that they will not proceed. It's the first massive U-turn of a government and of a Prime Minister that has insisted all along that the political optics of policies is not her concern. She wants to do what's right. She's told me that she's prepared to be unpopular. This clearly a step too far, and I think it speaks to the fact that underneath the smooth exterior of this conference that the Conservatives are trying to portray, that there are a lot of choppy waters underneath. And this is a Prime Minister who's now having to make decisions she might not want to in order to try and take down the political temperature. OK, so she threw the Chancellor under the bus yesterday. Is the writing on the wall for him now? I think that the Chancellor has had a really difficult start because of this policy. I've asked a lot of people in the party about that. There's no doubt that they would agree that he has been embattled. But I think the thing that Conservatives say to me as well is that the project, if you like, of this radical change to economic policy is really being driven by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in unison with the other two in their economic quad, as they call it, which is Simon Clarke, the Levelling Up Secretary, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Business Secretary. And quite frankly, I think Liz Truss at the moment is quite politically vulnerable because she doesn't have a groundswell of support in the backbenches, and some very, very senior people, such as Grant Shapps, and Michael Gove are making it difficult for her. So however she is feeling about her Chancellor or tensions, she might decide now is not the time. I should also say, though, that I have pressed those around Liz Truss about this sense of tension between her and her Chancellor. And on the issue of the 45 pence rate of tax, I was told yesterday that the Prime Minister fully backed Kwasi Kwarteng's decision to do it, even though today they are reversing. So in terms of the outward perception, Number 10 is certainly trying to present it as a united front between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. But this is obviously going to be hugely politically difficult for Kwasi Kwarteng on the day that he is delivering his economic speech on the economy, his speech on the economy, in which he was about to say this afternoon, we have to stay the course. And he'll kick off the day, we expect, with a reversal on that decision to abolish the top rate of tax, the 45 pence rate.
And what does that mean for conference, Beth, as a result? You made the point that it was originally going to be dominating conference, that it was 45p down at 40p. Now, I'm guessing, it's going to dominate conference, that the lady we're seeing on the screen has already done a U-turn.
I think there's two ways to look at this. This was going to dominate conference. Even last night, when I was talking to ministers, to government figures, they were saying, well, look, we can delay the vote. We don't have to vote on this measure until March next year on the abolition of the rate, so we can buy some time and we can park the issue. But clearly, the building of the rebellion led by Michael Gove and now Grant Shapps this morning, there has been a political calculation that if they don't reverse on this policy, they can't get past it at this conference. And I read it, and let's see what they say. We haven't heard anything yet. It's just what I understand is going to happen. It might be that they hope that they can reverse this decision today, get it over and done with, and then reset and get on with the conference, because obviously politically Number 10 and Number 11 have realised that with this row going on through conference, it will completely dominate and drown out everything else. But I think you're right that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, having been so publicly resolute in saying we are not for turning, will have a lot of explaining to do today as to why they are going to change the policy.
Why today, Beth? What's happened?
Well, as I said, I think there was a big brewing rebellion, and it was framing this whole conference in a very negative way of a new Prime Minister in but a few weeks coming to a conference where, I mean, the Times was reporting that 14, I hadn't totted them all up, but 14 MPs were publicly saying you cannot do this at this point in time when there's a cost of living crisis. And the other way you can look at this is that Liz Truss is listening to her backbenchers, that she will adapt if she sees that something is not politically viable. So that's one way you could interpret what they are going to do. But it is no doubt a very difficult thing to explain when a Prime Minister has insisted for the past week that they will not reverse the policy. The political rebellion has clearly become too great, and they want to do a U-turn and hopefully for them quickly move on.
Yeah, but I mean, she was resolute yesterday on that she wasn't going to do that U-turn, wasn't she, Beth? And she was throwing her, as I said, her Chancellor under the bus yesterday morning. And now it looks as though she's on the cusp of changing her mind. We believe an announcement around about 7:30, something like that, probably tying in with the market. Is it down to somebody like Michael Gove, who you mentioned, who is always, he may not be, in the top echelons of government at the moment, but he's always somebody that is going to influence the Conservative Party?
Look, Kay, I think the thing is that if we step back on what's going on kind of beneath the surface in the Conservative Party, Liz Truss only won in the first round of votes from MPs 50 votes. She then went on to win the leadership, but she never won publicly the majority support of the parliamentary party. And that tells us that she, yes, has a very supportive cabinet, and she has a big chunk of the party that ideologically agree with her in terms of trying to turbocharge the economy in the way that she is doing. But at the same time, if she cannot take her party with her, and if the Conservative infighting continues all through her first conference, when she's already 33 points down in one poll and other polls all put in the Labour leader in high double digits and even into 20 points plus, if she cannot take her party, then she is in seriously deep trouble. And I think that there has been a political calculation here that they do not want this row over the abolition of the 45 pence rate, which, as you said, is a small element of the entire package of that mini budget, to completely swamp this conference. I mean, one senior Conservative said to me last night, it simply was a mistake. The bankers' bonus decision and the top rate of tax were two relatively small policy announcements in a massive package, but they have completely distorted the way in which this budget was received. And the prospect of cutting tax rates for the highest earners in society when people are struggling with double-digit inflation, the prospect of rising mortgage rates, those high energy bills, even though there is government support, they are still running high. Not being able to lift public sector play with inflation, and even a discussion on whether or not benefits will be uplifted by earnings rather than inflation. It is really making Tories extremely anxious for their constituents, anxious about the prospects of re-election. And actually, for a Prime Minister who said she would plough on, overnight, clearly, she has listened and taken soundings and realised that she needs to U-turn on this policy. I imagine they will try and keep it very contained and quickly move on. Let's see if they can.
I just want to keep you for another couple of minutes, Beth. I know you've got other things to do, phone calls to make, but let's just listen quickly to what the Prime Minister said just yesterday.
I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Did you discuss scrapping the top rate with your whole cabinet?
No. No, we didn't. It was a decision that the Chancellor made.
Yesterday morning, less than 24 hours ago, Beth, she said that she was standing by her package. Now it looks as though she's on the cusp of completely doing a U-turn. What are the optics not only for the Chancellor but also for Liz Truss?
Honestly, Kay, I have to say, it's not just yesterday morning when she was talking to the BBC about this policy. It was as late as last night when I was talking to senior government figures. They were insisting as late as last night, before I did a report into the 10 o'clock news, that they weren't going to scrap this policy. What they were going to do instead was delay the finance bill. That's when you put in all the measures through the measures of the budget through Parliament, delay most of it until next year to buy themselves more time. But I think a couple of things have happened in the past 24 hours. I think that Jake Berry, talking to Sophie Ridge yesterday on her Sunday show, saying that those that rebelled would be stripped of the whip, so they would be punished by the party. I think that really agitated back benches, and I think they realised that this was a battle with the parliamentary party, that whether they did it in November or December or March next year, they couldn't win it, and that it was going to completely overshadow Liz Truss's conference. What they will be hoping to do is, if they can do this today, and Kwasi Kwarteng, if you like, takes the heat of it because it's Economy Day and it's his big speech, that Liz Truss will be able to reset this conference and move on, because, quite frankly, the conference has started with a massive row over the top rate of tax, which isn't going to go away. They've now clocked that and realised that it is better just to kill off this policy that was not really survivable anyway on the backbenches and try and move on. but it goes against everything that the Prime Minister has said ever since she was elected. I am prepared to be unpopular, is what she said to me, and she insisted that she was not going to reverse any of these policies as little as 24 hours ago.
Another busy day ahead for you, Beth. I'll let you get on. Thanks so much indeed. Thanks a lot. Keeping an eye on the markets. I don't think they're quite sure what to make of it. It was 111 when I woke up this morning. It's gone up to 113, down to 112, back up to 113 again against the dollar, while they figure out how they feel about the expected announcement at 7:30 that the 45p rate of interest tax, I should say, for the very highest earners was going to be scrapped and replaced by the 40p tax. That is now going to be scrapped in itself. The 45p highest rate of income tax was part of a growth plan that was put forward by Kwasi Kwarteng, the new Chancellor, freshly into his job, his mini-budget on the 23rd of September. It already looks as though he is about to announce a U-turn. Tamara is in Birmingham for us. How's this going to go down with the party faithful? Tamara, good morning.
Good morning, Kay. Yes, party faithful and some of them not so faithful. I think this news of an imminent, I expect we'll hear it very shortly from the government, U-turn on this 45p tax rate, Liz Truss's decision to abolish that rate paid by people earning over £150,000 is really going to electrify this conference, I think. We came here with the mood very edgy. You had a lot of Conservative MPs, even those who've not spoken publicly, some of whom are even ministers in Liz Truss's government, knowing they'd made a big misstep. Not necessarily on the policy, although many of them disliked that, the way it had been communicated to the public, the way that other people weren't brought in, because Liz Truss herself admitted the Chancellor had made the decision alone. They could all see the polls with huge leads for the Labour Party and a lot of discussion about how the Conservatives had the wrong priorities. The likes of Michael Gove and Grant Shapps going public saying you must spread the pain evenly. This sends entirely the wrong message. I think the news that Liz Truss appears to have made a very late night decision last night to change course on this is going to please some in the Conservative Party, a lot of MPs who had criticised it, party members, some of whom I spoke to yesterday, who wondered whether it was the right call. But it's also going to upset others. There were ministers in Liz Truss's cabinet who had taken heart from her saying, look, we know it's not popular, but she thinks it will help to generate growth and therefore it's worth sticking with because an election is still 2 years away and there's still time to make the arguments. I think the fact that Liz Truss has U-turned very quickly, and in politics, if you're not going to win votes, you do need to U-turn quickly. But I think to some in her cabinet, it will appear that Liz Truss has given in very easily, and they will see that as not a very good sign for a brand new Prime Minister less than a month into the job, that with an 80-seat majority that she's inherited, at the first sign of trouble, she is going to U-turn. So I think, look, if you're going to change course, as I was speaking to a senior Conservative in the last few days, it's better to do so quickly and try to move on, try to salvage what has undoubtedly been a lot of damage caused by this policy. But as a sign of her authority, I think for many Conservatives it's an ominous one.
Yeah, so I suppose we're going to hear from the Chancellor later. He was going to say his policies were the right ones and that he was going to press on. Obviously, it looks as though that is going to change. So others will now be looking at their policies on, I don't know, corporation tax and the reverse on the national insurance increase as well, which, you know, let's face it, would have cost an awful lot more money than this 45 down to 40p tax return.
It's going to embolden a lot of MPs who are critical of Liz Truss. And as Beth was saying there, a lot of MPs are critical of Liz Truss. She didn't win the rounds in Parliament of the leadership contest. And I think we're going to get another budget at the end of November when this, the Chancellor is going to set out how some of these measures are going to be paid for. And if those measures prove to be unpopular, then I think those MPs who've been critical of the 45p rate might think, well, if we get together and start criticising them, maybe she'll reverse course on those two. So I think very difficult decision for a Prime Minister to U-turn on a policy that she has personally supported. She says drives her aim of securing economic growth. She had suggested yesterday in that interview that it was more a failure of how the policy was communicated than the policy itself. But for Liz Truss, who has set herself up as someone who doesn't change course, who is prepared to be unpopular, who is prepared to take the tough decisions that Britain needs, as she often said during the contest, this is a serious blow. And I think while those around her have clearly said that there was no chance of this vote passing, I was very struck yesterday talking to a senior minister in her government who simply said to me 45p is not going to happen. Clearly she thought the arithmetic wasn't there, but the votes on this were not going to be held until March, so she decided not to try and make the arguments for it over the next few months, but simply to try and say, OK, I got it wrong, and try to move on some of her other policies. But she has been stung by the fact that having announced an absolutely huge measure to freeze people's energy bills over the winter months, which is going to cost around £150 billion, she has found herself in a political crisis over a measure which only costs around £2 billion.
Who's going to take the rap for it?
Well, that's the interesting question, Kay, and I think we'll be watching very closely to see what the Chancellor says when this is announced. We expect to be within the next half hour or so, and whether allies of the Chancellor later suggest that he was unhappy about the move. I mean, Kwasi Kwarteng had intended to say today, he's giving his big speech to the conference this afternoon, we will stay the course. I'm confident, he was planning to say, that we have the right plan. The whole day is now going to be overshadowed by this U-turn and the feeling that they got it wrong. Liz Truss put the ball very firmly in the Chancellor's court, saying he made that decision. He wanted, like Nigel Lawson in the 1980s, to simplify the tax system. He said it made no sense. He said that it actually brought in less tax when you had that 45p rate than when it was at 40p. Conservatives were saying that for much of the new Labour years, you didn't have a 45p rate of tax. So they were making all these arguments. Now they're going to have to simply say, people didn't come with us. We didn't bring the public or Conservative MPs with us, and therefore we can't do it. And I expect there'll be a lot of frustration in the Chancellor's camp today, and from Conservative MPs who are unhappy about this policy. I think there will be knives out for Kwasi Kwarteng. You're already hearing suggestions that if Liz Truss is to try and ride this out, maybe she won't be able to keep him as her Chancellor, her key ally.
Yeah, we're talking about Michael Gove, referred to Michael Gove there. Also, Grant Shapps has got thoughts on that. But as far as Michael Gove is concerned, there he is at conference, looking significantly slimmer than we've seen. I saw some pictures of him jogging in the papers this morning. He's, as I said to Beth, he's not in the higher echelons of government at the moment, but he's still a very powerful politician, isn't he? Yesterday morning, we heard from the Prime Minister she was not for turning. Even at 10 o'clock last night when Beth was speaking to us on News at 10, she was not for turning. Has this man got anything to do with the decision that we're expecting in the next 3 minutes?
Look, Kay, I think Michael Gove articulated what others across the party were feeling. They did not U-turn because he toured the TV studios criticising their policy. As annoying as that will have been for Liz Truss and her team, they will have taken soundings from across the party, whether MPs were going to vote for it. Many had told them that they simply wouldn't. MPs in marginal seats, because of course they're thinking of the next election in 2 years' time, whether they were prepared to support this policy. And also, when you look at who is criticising it, you've got to look at how organised they are. I think figures like Grant Shapps, who helped to organise Boris Johnson's leadership bid in 2019, he's the sort of figure who can really get people organised. You've got others who supported Rishi Sunak, who are former chief whips, people who are good at doing the numbers. So they will have looked at who their opponents were and exactly how many people they had behind them in making the decision to change course last night. But the discontent went pretty wide and pretty deep within the Conservative Party. Even people who had backed Liz Truss for the leadership said that they were concerned about the message it sent in what everyone knows are going to be tough times over the next couple of years, to be cutting taxes for people on the very, very highest earnings.
Indeed so. we were told that quite a few backbenchers were not going to go to Conservative Party conference because they were particularly unhappy with the mini budget and the impact that it's having on their own constituents. Obviously, it's very important to her what her backbenchers think. Do you think that they will welcome this?
So Rishi Sunak, of course, who lost the leadership contest, is not here, and some of his key supporters are not here either. I would say that it's quite common for Tory MPs who are not in government roles not to attend the party conference. It's a bit different to the Labour conference. There aren't lots of votes that they need to take part in, for example. But you did see a lot of Conservative MPs saying, look, I'm not going to bother attending. But it's interesting that in terms of leading this rebellion, Michael Gove and Grant Shapps do not need to be here, but they both are here, not doing any official events on the stage, but just touring the TV studios, touring what are called fringe events, which are events not at the official conference, but happening in the margins of it to criticise the government's policies. But as I say, they reflect far wider discontent, including among ministers. When I arrived yesterday, Kay, I ran into a few senior Conservatives, none of whom have spoken publicly criticising Liz Truss, but sort of a shell-shocked air around them that, you know, you've had loads of opinion polls giving big leads to the Labour Party. You've had Conservatives saying, look, this reverses all the work we've done over the last few years, appealing to voters on lower incomes. That everything, you know, you had Rachel Wolfe, who wrote Boris Johnson's 2019 manifesto, essentially saying this goes against everything that we were trying to do. All the indications were pretty bad. And while Liz Truss will upset right-wingers in her party, including in the cabinet, who feel that she should have faced down the rebels and tried to make the arguments over the next few months until all this will be voted on in March. Clearly, the Prime Minister and her team just felt that they had no chance of this getting through Parliament, that the next few months would just be dominated by the idea of a tax cut for millionaires, and it was better, if you're going to change course, to just do it quickly and try to pick up the pieces. But I think talking to insiders in government, a few days ago, they were very much saying,
stand by if you would, please.
This is
stand
all,
by,
you know,
stand by if you would, please,
Tamara.
Stand by for just a second. Just want to share this tweet with our viewers that is just coming our way. It's a little bit small, so I'll read it for you. From supporting British businesses to lowering the tax burden for the lowest paid, our growth plan sets out a new approach to build a more prosperous economy. However, it is clear that the abolition of the 45p tax rate has become a distraction from our overriding mission to tackle the challenges facing our country. As a result, I'm announcing we are not proceeding with the abolition of the 45p tax rate. We get it, and we have listened. This will allow us to focus on delivering the major parts of our growth package. And then he goes on to talk about the growth package. But basically, we get it, we have listened, is what he's saying. So it's been left to the Chancellor to do the U-turn. Is he toast, do you think? Tamara?
Yes, just reading this from the Chancellor. Complete reverse ferret. I mean, there had been some thought that maybe they would try to delay it, but the abolition of the 45p rate has become a distraction from our overriding mission. So they've listened, they know that they have not got the support for it. And while Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng will try to say that perhaps they didn't do the groundwork, they didn't make the arguments with Tory MPs in advance, the fact that this was a signature measure from the Chancellor, that they both said this would help to generate more tax, to get the economy growing, to meet all the promises that they had made over the last few weeks about how they would make difficult decisions to get the economy in a better place. I think this is not a good sign for the Chancellor's authority, and I think while they will leave this conference feeling that they've headed off a massive defeat in Parliament, headed off or tried to head off the impression that they were giving a tax cut to the very richest while refusing to commit to, for example, lifting benefits by the rate of inflation, think the Chancellor will leave this conference also with his authority very much weakened, and the feeling among Liz Truss's many critics in the party that if they can do it this time, perhaps they can do it again.
Yeah, but the fact that it's a tweet and it's from the Chancellor as opposed to the Prime Minister, who less than 24 hours ago was saying, yeah, we're on course. I don't mind if I'm not popular, but I'm going to crack on. And then overnight, there's been a reverse ferret and it's been left to this man to tweet about it.
Absolutely, and I think we will be over the next few hours trying to get a sense of exactly how that decision unfolded and whether it was indeed a joint decision. But certainly Liz Truss put the blame for that policy, said the policy was the Chancellor's, gave him the responsibility for it, and it has now fallen to Kwasi Kwarteng to say, we get it and we have listened, that MPs don't support it. Couldn't really be a more difficult start to a new government just a month in to have one of their signature economic policies dismantled by opposition within their own party. And we're already starting to see those who'd criticised the policy publicly welcoming this U-turn. Kay, just looking at some of the reaction now coming in, Grant Shapps, who will be speaking to us any minute now, has said that it was the right decision. Conservatives want lower taxes, but let's show our energy price cap and other policies that are on the side of consumers, because so many MPs and even ministers in Liz Truss's government felt that having spent £150 billion on freezing people's energy bills to try and make sure the winter was not as difficult as it could have been, they were getting absolutely no credit for it, having announced a policy which, for many, just sent all the wrong signals about her intentions, giving a tax cut to the very richest, while, in the view of many, sort of failing to protect the very poorest. And Labour are going to be jubilant about this. I've just had a message from a senior Labour source close to Keir Starmer who said the Tories have destroyed their economic credibility and undermined trust in the UK as a result. So this will be known now as the conference at which a huge U-turn was carried out, and I don't think there'll be much of a hearing for anything else.
Yeah, just looking at Annalise Dodds, actually, who was tweeting yesterday, and suggestions that the government had potentially thought about going even further. Many will be sickened by media reports of champagne quaffing Tory donors, encouraging the Chancellor to press ahead with further tax cuts for billionaires. So they were considering even more tax cuts, according to some newspapers over the weekend.
Well, there's some very toxic stories over the weekend, Kay. We know that after that Friday's mini-budget, the Chancellor had gone on Sunday news programmes saying that there may be more tax cuts, and that was given as a factor which had helped to move the markets on the Monday, had seen the pound fall to that level, because the Chancellor had suggested that having announced all these unfunded tax cuts, he may even go further. You then had over the weekend a story confirmed yesterday by the Tory party chairman Jake Berry that the Chancellor had been drinking champagne with city people, including hedge fund managers, and the suggestion denied by the Chancellor's team that they had they'd been egging him on in some of those policies in what obviously looks very bad. So, look, the U-turn is now there. It appears to have been decided very late last night, and it's the Chancellor who has had to announce it after the Prime Minister said that it was his policy and he hadn't consulted the Cabinet on it before announcing it on that Friday. So Kwasi Kwarteng's big drive to simplify the tax system, which he said would kickstart economic growth, bring in even more money, is already fallen by the wayside. And you just got to wonder whether Liz Truss's critics will see this and be sort of sharpening their knives for the next time she does something a bit unpopular.
Yeah, indeed. So let's bring in Ian King, should we, our business presenter, of course. Ian, I think the market, I'm right in saying the market's open at 8.
Yes.
What might they do?
Well, that's right, Kay. We've actually already seen a reaction, though, in terms of the markets, because sterling obviously is foreign exchange is a 24-hour market, and sterling has reacted. You can see it on the screen there. It's actually up around 2/3 of 1% right now against the US dollar. So there's been a modest sort of reaction. I mean, the truth of the matter is that fiscally speaking, this isn't really one of those policies that moves the needle. I mean, it was only going to cost something like £2 billion a year. And in fact, in the next financial year, it was actually going to raise some £625 million because of the changes of people's timing of their bonuses. A lot of people would wait for the scrapping of the additional rate. So it doesn't really move the needle in terms of the public finances. Obviously, it's the optics that are far more important. But I think it's pretty unfortunate for the government, to put it mildly, because obviously they're still going to get all of the opprobrium, the perception that they're a party for the rich, without actually getting the benefits of this move, because there were actually very, very sound reasons for scrapping this additional rate. It was, after all, it was only bringing the top rate of income tax back to where it was for all but the last 6 weeks of the Labour government under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. So, as I say, fiscally speaking, it doesn't really move the needle. I'm surprised, actually, in some ways, that there hasn't been more of a response, because it kind of doesn't show the government up in a particularly good light. The fact that this was a pretty totemic policy that they've suddenly reversed on, it doesn't really send a good signal to the markets, because now people wonder, well, what else might they backtrack on?
But the markets don't deal in emotion, do they?
No, I mean, markets are dispassionate and unsentimental, and I think what this measure tells you is that the first whiff of cannon fire from some of their rebellious backbenchers, the government backs down. So there was in terms of what Mr. Kwarteng was talking about with his fiscal statement, it was all about making the UK economy more competitive, this unabashed focus on growth, and all of a sudden it turns out that they're not very keen on some aspects of driving growth when it doesn't go down terribly well with their backbenchers.
Indeed so. For now, thanks very much, Ian. Thank you. Let's bring in Grant Shapps, should we? Previously Transport Secretary, has been very vocal about this cut in tax from 45p to 40p. With us now from Conservative Party conference at Birmingham, of course. Hello to you. You must be pleased.
Morning, Kate. Yeah, look, the right thing to do. It just didn't wash. I noticed very strongly, as if I needed any evidence when I was knocking on doors in my Welwyn Hatfield constituency on Saturday morning. The people were saying, look, I'm about to take on another shift at work because I'm so worried about mortgage rates. And they understand that rates are going up because inflation was high, because of Putin's invasion. But what they didn't understand is why the government would be borrowing money in order to fund a tax reduction for people who are better off, and in doing so, spooking the markets and potentially making those mortgage rates even higher in the process. So the policy didn't stack up and it didn't make sense. And it's absolutely right and proper, and I'm very pleased it's been done quickly, that the government's U-turned on this, and I strongly welcome it this morning.
Why do you think she's changed her mind? Why do you think they've changed their mind? Yesterday morning, she was saying the lady's not for turning.
Well, as I said to the Prime Minister and to the Chancellor, it couldn't have got through Parliament. There's no mathematical way that MPs were going to go and vote for this. You didn't have to knock on many doors to realise how deeply unpopular it would have been. And that was a pity, because it was a big distraction from the much, much bigger funds going into capping the energy prices, which is a multi-billion-pound cap, doing really great things. So it was actually distracting from all the really good work that the government was doing. Sometimes when you get these things wrong, as the government did in this case, it's best just to acknowledge that and move on. And that's why reading Kwasi Kwarteng's, the Chancellor's statement this morning, where he just says, I get it, I'm pleased to see. He's absolutely right. This could not have gone through. And there's no way that you can simply say, well, we're going to push it through anyway. That's not how politics works.
I get that, Mr. Shapps, but I suppose my question is, what's happened between yesterday morning and today?
I'm afraid you'd have to be asking the Chancellor, the Prime Minister. What I do know is it must have become increasingly obvious to them, as I went out myself and others, to say soundings are, you will not get this through Parliament. Soundings from the public are, this is deeply unpopular. and it's distracting from the good work, as I say, on things like energy and other changes that they're making, that this could not possibly go through. So I think, shall we say, reality sunk in.
We get it. We've listened from the Chancellor. Why do you think? I'm interested to know your thoughts as to why the Chancellor is tweeting rather than hearing it from the leader of the country.
Again, that will be there. That will be for them to say. I mean, I don't think that the Prime Minister would possibly be able to go all the way through conference without referencing it. So I'm sure when she gives interviews or when she makes her speech, she'll have to make reference to this. As I say, I welcome what they've done. It was the wrong move at the wrong time and sent the wrong signals. And it was also spooking the markets, of course. So I think that for all of those reasons, credit where credit's due, they've changed that. I want to see things move on. I want to see the Prime Minister be successful. I want to see a Conservative government who, if nothing else, should always be there to protect the nation's purse, to look after money, make sure it's sound. So, this is a very, very important moment that they're showing they're actually going to do that as a government. And I hope also they pay a little bit more attention, as the Prime Minister said, to the communications as well, because it does matter. It matters hugely. People need to understand what the government's doing and why the government's doing it, and then a little bit more energy needs to be put into that as well. OK, let me put it more bluntly. Is he toast? No, I don't think so. And actually, we saw him, for example, the 2012 budget, a long time ago now. It was called the Omni-Shambles budget. It was a George Osborne budget that went terribly wrong. But what he did at the same time was to reverse some of the measures that were causing the problem in that budget. And as we saw, we actually went on to win the next election. So I think it's important that this has been done quickly. I think it's important that the Chancellor has acknowledged that he got it wrong. And I think he says in his statement this morning, we get it. We understand. That was not the best thought through approach. They wanted to do everything at the same time. And sometimes if you try and throw everything in at the same time, it creates a blockage. It was too much. And, I want to see lower taxes. I expect every Conservative and most people in the country would like to see lower taxes. But you've got to sequence these things according to outside factors, including the massive pressure on household budgets right now. We can't go borrowing money in order to cut one particular tax at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying about the pasty tax and the like, but he'd already been Chancellor for a couple of years by then. This is his first budget, and he's already doing a massive U-turn.
Yeah, but on a budget which actually does an even more massive amount of things. So that budget, if you think about it, has brought in, I think, the biggest energy cap in Europe, and certainly the amount we're spending looks to outclass other European countries on protecting people's energy bills. That change to what could be called an employment tax, that's the national insurance change, and many other measures. So it's a huge budget anyway, even when you remove this part of it. This part of it was £2 billion worth of expenditure, so it was not the biggest part by any means at all, but it was a massive distraction, and that's why it had to go. It was actually distracting from the other good stuff he's doing. So no, I think the Chancellor can push on now. I hope he does. I hope that actually the Chancellor and the Prime Minister think about the way that they're communicating stuff going forward. It really matters to the markets, to Conservative MPs, of course, but mainly to our constituents and to the country. And I think we need to make sure that going forward in the future, that these things are much better thought through and they're much better communicated.
So you're saying that it was communicated badly and badly thought through?
Well, the Prime Minister herself said it was communicated badly. I agree with her. And clearly, actually, you might have a desire to do something. And by the way, I share their desire. I want lower taxes across the economy. But I also understand that, first of all, we have to have the economy moving. We have to make sure that we're protecting people from these high energy costs as they're doing, and so much else. And it speaks to your priorities, doesn't it? And so, yes, of course, this was the wrong moment for it. That's why I said they needed to change it. And it would be a bit churlish if I did not recognise and appreciate the fact that it's been changed this morning.
What's going to happen to those millionaires now that they wanted to keep happy?
Well, look, I mean, people who are on these higher tax rates, and by the way, it can include people in all walks of life. But I mean, I think, and this is what amazes me, I haven't spoken to anybody who was on that 45p bracket who wasn't saying, I don't feel comfortable about this. I don't think this is the right time for this to happen. So, I mean, strangely, it was a tax cut which wasn't even pleasing people who were about to receive or would have received that reduction in taxation. So it was wrong on every level. It was wrong timing on every level. And if you're going to make these changes, you need to set out the case first. You need to explain to people. And I think, by the way, there is a very good case for this, why we should have lower taxes. For example, our taxation's higher at that level than it is for people who live in Ireland, for example, in the Republic. So, you know, there's a perfectly sensible case to be made, but you've got to go and make that case first. You can't just jump straight to the solution sometimes, and you've got to do it at the right time when the economy can afford it as well. So, you know, they made the right move, somewhat belated, but I'm welcoming it.
OK, so you've not met anybody who thought it was a good idea, including those that were going to benefit from it. Does that not just illustrate that this Prime Minister's out of touch?
Well, let's give the benefit of the doubt for the moment. The Prime Minister came in. There was, of course, the very sad. Well, because everyone makes mistakes. Okay, I mean it's just human nature.
She's
everyone
running
makes
the country,
mistakes.
and they were trumpeting this as a fantastic opportunity to get the country moving. And you're saying that nobody that you've spoken to thought it was a good idea. So who were they speaking to?
Yeah. Now I hear you. Look, and I didn't support this particular Prime Minister in the leadership, but she did win it, and she's now done the right thing. Everybody makes mistakes. Let's see what happens next. I'm looking for, if you like, wise decisions, well communicated, to lead the country and take it forward. I'm prepared to see what happens next. But, as I say, it'd be a bit churlish this morning if I didn't recognise a policy that really jarred with the public. It was very noticeable on the doorstep. It was the go-to complaint has been resolved, and I'm pleased to see that happened this morning. And I hope that full acknowledgement, which I hope is reflected by the Prime Minister as well as the Chancellor, as you mentioned, enables us to move forward with some of the other bigger stuff we're doing, like trying to get the economy moving at a faster rate and like the protection that we're providing for people on everyone's energy bills, including for businesses.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for bearing with us. Much appreciated. See you soon.
You're welcome. Hope so.
Thank you. Former Conservative Whip Steve Double with us now. Hello. Your thoughts on this volte-face?
Good morning. Well, I think it's very welcome. I think it's the right decision. As Grant Shapps was just saying, I think this policy had no chance of actually getting through Parliament, and it was going to cause a huge distraction from the many positive things that were in the mini-budget. And I think the government have done the right thing to now drop this cut in the 45p rate.
Where did they get the idea it was a good idea in the first place?
Well, I think we have a Prime Minister who has a very clear set of ideas and vision for what she wants the country to be. And I think many of us share that. But firstly, those changes have to be made at the right time. But also, it's very important she takes the parliamentary party with her. And having spent a big chunk of time in the Whip's office over the last year or so, we put through, under the previous Prime Minister, a number of very difficult and challenging decisions, but we took time to engage with the parliamentary party, listen to their concerns, answer their questions and take them with us. And I'm afraid the government didn't do that on this occasion, and I hope that's one lesson they will now learn. She said it wasn't her idea, it was the Chancellor's. Well, I think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are quite clear. They share their view of the need to simplify our tax system. I think that's many of us, all of us Conservatives share that view. But as I said, it's about doing these things at the right time and in the right way. And it's very important to take the parliamentary party with you. What's happened, do you think, between yesterday morning when she was resolute to 7:25 this morning when the Chancellor had to embarrassingly tweet that we get it and we've listened? I suspect it became very clear that they were not going to be able to get this through Parliament. I know that there was a growing number of backbenchers who were saying they wouldn't support this, and I think that the stark reality probably hit home that they would lose a vote on this, and therefore they've done the right thing by rowing back.
But at what stage could they possibly have thought it was a good idea for tax cuts for millionaires when people are struggling to eat and heat?
Well, I think that's a question that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have to answer. That's exactly the point that I was making to the government and to the Whip's office, that this was just the wrong time, that when so many households are going to face incredibly difficult months ahead to meet their bills, for us to be giving a tax cut to the wealthiest 1% of earners in this country was just the wrong decision. It sent the wrong message to the country. I think the Prime Minister has to explain why she thought that was the right thing. But as I said, I'm just delighted that they have now listened and done the right thing.
Does she have questions to answer this morning?
Well, I think she does, but clearly she has to answer those questions. As I said, I think the most important lesson that she needs to learn from this is that in a parliamentary democracy, you have to take the parliamentary party with you. You cannot just railroad things through Parliament if you don't have the support of the backbenchers. And I hope that she will reflect and learn from this, that it's very important. I think, the parliamentary party has shown over recent months and years, we can make difficult decisions, but that we have to be listened to and you have to take us with you. And I think that is probably the most important lesson that the Prime Minister can learn through all of this.
How surprised were you that she didn't even discuss it with Cabinet?
Well, I think that, on when it comes to budgets, there are rules around that where you cannot share things. But I think on something, I think most of what was in the budget, she had trailed through her leadership campaign. There were no big surprises that, but this was literally the proverbial rabbit out of the hat that no one was expecting. And I think that was part of the problem here, that this was a decision out of the blue. And clearly, as she has admitted, that wasn't run past Cabinet before it. And I think that's all part of the lessons that need to be learned from this.
Sure. I mean, one of the problems that your government is going to face, Mr. Double, is that the allegation that you are out of touch with normal people. And we see this massive U-turn. Is that going to be enough? Or do we see stories that are developing in the papers over the weekend with allegations that the night of the mini-budget, the Chancellor is going quaffing champagne with multimillionaires who've gone short on the pound and made a fortune to add to their already massive fortunes. And somebody quoted as describing him as a useful idiot.
Well, look, I think that the government have done the right thing. They've admitted they got this wrong and they've quickly reversed it. And I think that shows that we have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor that is willing to listen and willing to change when it is clearly the right thing to do. And as I said, I think that is the important thing here, that going forward, there needs to be better engagement with the parliamentary party and with backbenchers. And we need to work these things. We need to understand far better why these decisions are being made and the implications of them before they're just pushed through. And I think that is the important thing to do. Questions about events that the Chancellor has attended, I think only he can answer. I can't answer those for him.
Is he holed under the waterline?
No, I hope not. I hope that what this demonstrates is what I've just said, that he is willing to listen and do the right thing. And I think as long as he does that going forward, then there's every reason for him to continue.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time.
Pleasure.
Enjoy conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining us now. Who have we got next? We've got Joe Tanner with us. This is great news. Chief Exec at In-House Communications, former Conservative Party advisor to Boris Johnson, of course, when he became Mayor of London. He must be laughing in his cornflakes this morning, Joe. Good morning.
Good morning, Kay.
How do you think, if you were advising them, what would you tell them to do next?
Well, I think the communications, we're all universally agreed on, have been pretty poor. And I think even overnight, actually, it's been very interesting. Only Beth Rigby, your own political editor, and many others were saying that, the government were going to stay the course. They were adamant about keeping the 45p policy. And actually, by the morning, that's changed. We know that things have happened overnight. There's obviously been some serious conversations taking place. So I think the fundamental point is they've listened, and that is never a bad thing. but it is not a good look when you're this early on in your administration. So I think they're going to have to tough it out today. It's going to be a difficult day for both Liz Truss and also the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, and he's got a day of business day, as they call this, on Monday. So there's lots of businesses meeting, lots of government interactions. Government ministers are interacting. The Conservative Party have a big focus on their business activities, that they make sure that businesses understand what's going on. That's obviously been one of the big problems since the mini-budget. And they're now going to have to make sure that they get people to understand what on earth it is they're trying to do. Liz Truss yesterday admitted she hadn't told her government what was going to be happening. And it's very clear that that has not been the right path. And also, to have a bunch of MPs that do not understand what's going on and also do not support it is not the way to run a government. So I think it's good that they've listened, but they're going to have to now hold firm. They're going to have some very difficult conversations, some very difficult interviews, and they're going to have to, make sure that they concentrate on showing that they're listening, which I think they have done, which is good. But they're going to have to ride this out now.
Yeah, you say that, Jo, but I mean, yesterday morning she was saying she doesn't care about not being popular. She's there to make difficult decisions, and she was going to stand by her policies. She's tweeted within the last couple of minutes saying, "We get it, and we've listened." The same words that we've heard from the Chancellor, of course. The abolition of the 45% rate has become a distraction from our mission to get Britain moving. Our focus now is on building a high-growth economy that funds world-class public services, boosts wages and creates opportunities across the country. Why has she changed her mind? Why has she done that volte-face within 24 hours?
Well, I certainly can't answer that question because I haven't been in the room. However, I think you have been reporting, as have others, about how difficult that policy has been. We've seen the reaction since it was announced. So I think it's inevitable that the government had to listen. I think perhaps arriving and seeing the reaction firsthand, hearing from her team who are out and about, probably getting lobbied very hard, and hearing, who was involved in stoking up the so-called rebellion has been reported. But I think fundamentally you get the mood. When you walk in, your team can get a sense that something isn't right. I've been doing conferences for over 20 years. And you can tell that the conversations are not going your way. You can tell that people are coming up to you and they're telling you things that you're not really perhaps expecting, or your response to the questions, it's not going down very well. I don't think anyone thought that yesterday's interview was particularly strong from the Prime Minister. So, she's got to now try and help turn this tanker around and make sure that she can get her party back on board. Now, showing that she's listening is certainly a start, but it isn't a great start for a premiership when you're trying to show you've got authority.
But what does it say about a Prime Minister and a Chancellor when they're freshly in office, they've got a mini-budget and they think it's a good idea to cut the top rate of tax for millionaires when there is a cost of living crisis? What does that say about them being in touch with the voters?
Exactly. I think that's exactly why we have seen the response that we've seen, and that's exactly why I think the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have taken the decision they've taken. We're in one of those really difficult positions, Kay, where the fact that they're making a U-turn then becomes the story, and it's a sign of weakness. But actually, if they weren't making a U-turn, we'd be complaining that they weren't listening. So the government are in now, they've positioned themselves into a rock and a hard place where they don't have much choice other than to take one or other path, which are going to be uncomfortable. I personally think they're taking the right path now in terms of reversing that decision. And I think it's going to be welcomed by people that are here in Birmingham and across the country.
Jo, what does it say about the bigger picture, that they thought it was a good idea in the first place?
Well, I think it was a misjudgment. I don't think there's any other way of putting it. I think it was very clear, not only the actual policy, but the failure to communicate what they were trying to do, which I think has been the bigger issue. There is definitely a mood here where some people are saying the 45p was not necessarily the problem. The lack of communication about the whole policy was the problem. I'm not an expert, and I'm not going to say that, whether I believe it was right or wrong. I didn't think the optics of it. I didn't understand why, with a cost of living crisis, it was the right approach to take. But, I know there are people with bigger brains that perhaps felt it was right. I don't understand the logic. I'm sure some people feel there was a logic to it. It's not something that I understood, so I'm glad that there's a change coming.
OK, it's good to talk to you, Jo. Probably see you up at conference. Thanks very much for taking the time. Much appreciated. Thank you. So, a couple of things to update you on, both from the Prime Minister and her Chancellor, who have been tweeting this morning, lengthy tweet from the Chancellor, less so from the Prime Minister, both using the same wording, though, that when it comes to the abolition of the 45p tax rate. The Chancellor saying, we get it and we have listened. And that's exactly the same wording that we heard from the Prime Minister, who retweeted her Chancellor saying, we get it and we are listening. So that is from Liz Truss this morning. There you go. She goes on to talk about the growth in the economy, etc. But both of them acknowledging that they got it wrong 24 hours, less than 24 hours after saying that they were absolutely on the right course and were progressing forward on that course, with this 45% rate of income tax being cut down to 40%, which would have meant that millionaires would earn an extra £55,000 a year at least. They said that that was the right thing to do to open up Britain to the wider world. Less than, when was it, 23rd of September, less than 3 weeks later, they have said, we've got it and we have listened.